All right, ladies and gents, have you ever been so convinced that you've invented a product that you know loads of people will want? For tech companies, we love to build things that have bells and whistles on, but did you ever actually get to the point where you think you've nailed all the features and then realize that nobody actually wants them? Now, I know we do this in tech all the time. We love to build, but we often build and realize that actually nobody wants it. Well, Naily is here to help you avoid making that mistake again. And I want to give a very warm welcome to Makangu, who's somebody I've actually known for about 5 years. But we've only met in person for the first time today. We know each other through a network called the Junior Chamber. We've met each other head and shoulders on Zoom, as most people did through lockdown. And I'm really pleased she's come all the way from Cambridge via Liverpool to be with us in Cornwall today. She is a software engineer turned the Mary Poppins of startups. Naily brings her multifaceted toolkit to lead complex software projects and launch new products for seed startups and large corporations like Siemens Industry Software. She helps startups and scale-ups improve the maturity of their tech teams and prepare for investor due diligence whilst continuing to deliver what customers expect. In her talk, If I Build It, They Will Come, I think, Naily will share her value expertise on how to test the market, validate your tech product before you spend valuable time and resource in building it. So, without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Naily.
What if you could build a cathedral without an architect, blueprints, or even a construction background? In addition to that, what if you could build a cathedral without a license to build in the first place or a license to build a cathedral? True story. This is an amazing building. That's a cathedral, but not a cathedral in the outside of Madrid. The priest who's starting building it started in the early 1960s after contracting tuberculosis. He decided that if he was ever cured, he was going to devote every single day of his life to turn the plot of land that he had into a cathedral. And he did just that. He had limited resources, so he used recycled materials, help from the community, and pretty much spent time learning, especially in the era where there was not even YouTube. So that's really impressive that he managed to build this. Interestingly, although it's not finished, it's a work of art. And in fact, if you are ever in Madrid and wanted to go away from the tourist trap, I highly recommend you go and visit this building. I've been there, it's fascinating. The question comes, what happens next? He passed away about 2 years ago. It's not a cathedral, so the Catholic Church cannot take that on. There's no planning permission or blueprints. We're unsure what the foundation looks like, let alone completing that. This is a story that sounds strange, and of course this building is amazing, worth a visit. But one thing that's interesting, we see that every day in the world of startups. Many startups go in and jump into this idea of creating a product. And of course, it comes from a seed of an idea and it develops over time without architects, without even having blueprints on how to finish the product. We just start and find the answers and the team and the people on our way. So how do we do that in a way that first, we don't lose a lot of resources, and secondly, we make sure that when we open the door, there are punters waiting for us we are waiting for our punters to come in. I'm Naily Makangu, but people know me as the Mary Poppins of startups. I'm passionate about helping startups dream, build, and play. And that includes this idea of how do I go from just the seeds, whether it's a new idea, a new product line, or just a next iteration of what I'm doing. To introduce this concept, it's based on research and the work that I do with clients. I created a company called Splash. It's not enough that I have my own and I work with startups. I just always love inventing companies. But through a case study of building an app, I want to show some of the tools that you can use to think differently in terms of building, but also to think differently in terms of reaching out to the market. Splash is building an app called Alexandria. And the idea is to transform how digital nomads meet other people in other cities through swapping books. There's also this idea of maybe doing a virtual platform. When we start thinking about startups or idea or a product, it always starts with solving a problem and, of course, our own personal passion. That's all we have to get on. Now, how do we move to the next step? With an idea such as this, a lot of the technology has already been done before. Especially with no code, the temptation of jumping in and just going in and just put something together is quite strong. I see that a lot, especially when I work with technical founders that are engineers themselves or understand more of the no code. It's staying in your comfort zone pushes them to build, and at the end they realize, oh, there's this other side of attracting customers that we haven't thought about. So it's a bit like building something for a year and starting kind of at ground zero, because attracting and letting the world know you takes a lot of time. Others, whether you are technical or not, also stay in the comfort zone because it's overwhelming knowing exactly what the steps to take to test the market. On the other side, it's also overwhelming understanding the right strategies for marketing, sales, and everything that you need to know to build a business. But why you should resist the temptation of building, because that's the comfort zone, and go out there and talk to as many people as you want. Well, it's simple. As you've seen with the church in that town outside of Madrid, you might end up with foundations that will make it difficult for you to build on top of. It's going to be more expensive. You might spend a lot of time building features that any engineers that will come after the first set of engineers will have a headache, not understanding why this was done in the first place and never being used. But we need to maintain that to avoid bugs. Everything becomes more expensive. In addition to that, you might think, if I do it myself, well, I'll save some money. If time is money, you've lost money in that case. So that's why it's really important to really start thinking differently when we come up with testing. And I love to simplify things as much as I can, especially to introduce people to thinking differently about building software or building a product. I know there are other experts in the room and other people who've been in the startup world, and you're thinking, we only have 3 steps: idea, build, test. Yes, those are the 3 steps that I want you to take from today's session. Idea. It all starts with a seed of an idea, and that is actually the most exciting part. A lot of people in the startup world, entrepreneurs, and even in whatever field you are, we love creating things. That's the excitement when you start brainstorming what we could do, what feature we're going to build. Sometimes we forget that there's a world outside that we also need to explore. When we start looking at ideas, some of the concepts I want people to start thinking differently in the team is thinking about what assumptions are we making based on what we want to build. For example, Alexandria, they really want to target digital nomads. Assumptions could be that digital nomads might not even want to read because they are always in beautiful cities. How do you know it's true or not if you haven't validated and actually asked the people? Or another assumptions will be that they might always fly around with books ready for them to share. Again, how do you know if you haven't tested the market? So that's important that when you are still in that super exciting stage of ideas and brainstorming, and when the world is rosy because you haven't even gone into the pain of realizing that certain things won't work, to start thinking about assumptions and risk. Then you look at which one of them will really affect us in the future, or which one of them are critical that we are going to work on those step by step. Avoid the temptation of just jumping in and looking at everything at the same time. Then we move on to the second phase, which is build. And again, build is really exciting. What happens? People jump in, try to find the tools, especially that no-code, which I love, by the way. No-code makes life easier, but it doesn't mean that it's a license to jump in straight away without a validation of the market. Going back to my point I made earlier, time is money. One of the things that I really encourage people to do in the building phase is to take a step back to think about the processes. How will people discover my product, and how people are going to work within a particular workflow? And it's also based on whichever assumption you decide to test during the iteration. The other key point when it comes to building is asking yourself another question. What is the minimum I can do to get through this stage as quickly as possible to go to the next stage test? Because that's where I know whether what I'm working on is worth it or not. So that when you get to the stage of testing, you can go, you know exactly which assumptions or risk you want to validate. You can then start doing something about it. Once you're done with that phase, you go back and go through the iteration once again. Well, how does it look like if I was just starting out working on Alexandria? When we start coming with the idea, and we know already that our focus is on digital nomads because they're in a new city and they might want to find books in a different language than the language that they speak in the city, so that could be a bit hard. But we do have some assumptions with that. So when we think about validating that as part of the build, we start looking at different platforms, surveys, landing pages, interviews, and the rest. I've got a QR code at the end with more information on tools that you can use as well. Now, the interesting thing, again, when it comes to the build, yes, first stop and ask yourself, how quickly can I put something together? Once you've done that, another key thing that you really need to think about before even moving on the test, who's going to test it? And how do we make sure that when we launch this tiny iteration, there are people out there that will actually want to test it? What tends to happen when you get to the testing phase, really excited, you've got your best surveys, all the colors in the world, the pictures are just spot on, then there's nobody who wants to test it. And that's because people will rely on friends and family, which I think that's great to interview a friend or family or ask them to fill a survey. But when it comes to validating products, love can be a problem because they will tell you what you want to hear rather than the truth of what they think about what you're working on. They want to support you. So that's why you go out a little bit further. So then how do you handle that? Think about different groups out there. Reddit is a great platform. Think about LinkedIn is great to attract people. Go out in the community where your target market will reside, whether it's an event on Meetup, whatever it is, then just start asking people questions. One thing that you'll notice, by taking this approach and really pushing on this testing phase, you are starting to letting the world know that something is coming. And even if you do not like marketing, that is already better than staying in your room, building the entire product, and just coming out at the last stage. But when do I finish testing? One thing that we hear a lot is agile, right? Agile, go fast, yes, great, exciting. But why do you want to limit your testing phase in 2 weeks if you don't even have any success criteria? One of the advice I have for the startups I work with is to define the success criteria of a phase right at the idea stage. And that's because at the idea stage, the energy is actually quite high, and we are more positive, and we feel like the world is great. So if you define your success criteria, for example, we want to interview 50 digital nomads and have this certain ratio to know whether our assumption is right or not. When you are at the testing phase, even if you decide to limit based on weeks, 1 week or 2 weeks, you will work hard to hit the milestone that you wanted as part of the success criteria. Once that's done, you go back for the next iteration. You take it all the way back to the drawing board with the team. What have we learned? How do we change these assumptions and the next? What does it look like in terms of the next bit of feature that we want to build next? Again, I do emphasize that one of the key reasons why I love the approach of testing and validating is that some people now know that you exist. Before, they didn't. So if we take the concept of Alexandria, maybe we realize that digital nomads might not be the right target because they worry so much about weight as they travel a lot. What if we go for professionals that are more likely to relocate with their sofas, if they have a really nice one, or their belongings, which will then include books? That's what we are going for. We now know that this is the market we want to tackle. How about focusing on the book swapping aspect of things? Let's go for that. That is part of redefining the idea and what we are going to work in the next iteration. At that point, what is quite exciting is that you start coming up with ideas on the requirement that you need and start seeing the bigger vision slowly appear. It comes to the point where you have to build, again, this idea of swapping books. It's not rocket science. We need books. People give us upload the book somewhere. Then some people request, you match them, move on. All of those things can be done with AI, blockchain, great technology in the future. But we are talking at the moment where we don't even know that the market exists. How do we do it quickly? We can have a website, but what if you ask yourself the question, how can I do this as quickly as I can so that I can move out of this phase and see what the result could be? That's where, even if you wanted to jump into no-code, again, first look at what else is around. But for me, the key thing here to change our mindset into the build phase is thinking again about the processes. How do you map a simple diagram of the workflow of swapping books and what does it mean? Now that you are faced with a diagram, it's easy to ask yourself the question, what is the basic technology that exists so that I can fulfill that? You might think that a simple form is okay to get the information from people based on the books that they have. The matching, well, if you have an Airtable or Google spreadsheet or something like that, that can help you with some aspect of the matching, and you might even have some people in the background doing the work for you. Sometimes when we think of the idea of startups or building a product, we love the word technology so much that we forget that the seeds of most of the beautiful companies that we love and admire and the apps that we have, some of them started by doing some manual processes in the background, but that story is not really exciting until after they become a unicorn. So do look at having, if you can outsource or even a consultancy model to keep you afloat, might actually encourage you to even start looking at different ways of making revenue, even if you don't have a platform. But it will definitely help you to move to where you want to go to next and validate whilst minimizing the risk. And again, time is money. When we get to the testing phase, we already know, because in the build phase, we analyze how we are going to let the world know about that. Perfect. So we do have people waiting for us. And more importantly, we remember this time around that during the idea phase, we had our success criteria. So we know how we can do the matching and how many matches, even if the feature doesn't allow people to actually do the swapping, as in physically, because we haven't figured that out, but at least we now know that there is an interest. And round and round and round we go. And that's really the key of this idea of just iterating through understanding your priorities. What do you want to validate at every single point? And eventually, as the company grows, that will turn into the roadmap of your product. And of course, you're going to get to the point where you're really excited and bring on whether it's no coding and engineers. In the case of Alexandra, it could be something as simple as, now that we know we can match, we can do get information for the books, let's work on the matching systems. The same process will apply all over again. And I believe that by asking this question during the building phase, how can we simplify what we are doing so that we spend less time building and more time testing, it encourages you to think a bit more creatively. It could be that for the swapping, we can build something on a platform so people can swap addresses and whatever, but the complexity of doing that at the beginning, it sounds like an easy idea, but get a few engineers in the room and we'll tell you how complex in practice it is to have all the features for that. If it's something, the goal of Alexandria is to bring people together, why not just go to a have event once every month and says, hey, we know that you've matched with so-and-so. We send you an email to an email automation, very cheap. How about you come to this event and that's where the swapping happens? So again, this is just an example. There are many, many different scenarios, but the process and the thought pattern will really help you on your way. To finish off, a key thing, do not work in isolation. And the testing phases I've mentioned before will really help you to push and let the world know that you exist. This is another concept called building in public. Imagine that as you are doing that, and as I really do not like marketing. Anybody who's heard me on stage, on my podcast, I do that. I say that time and time again. I'm happy to go in the basement and code any time of the day. Marketing is a blackout for me. I have a lot of respect for that. So what I do and how I encourage other startups that feel overwhelmed is to just answer a few questions about what they're doing. I do have a questionnaire that I send them. And then ask them to think about, as part of this iteration, what did you learn? What was the fun part, the hardest part? All of that is actually content that now, thanks to ChatGPT, don't know how I lived before that, but thanks to ChatGPT, you can really turn all of that data, that information, into something that you can post online. So that really simplifies your process. And in addition to building in public, is not just to make sure that people come to you and get to know you. It's not just to make sure that you start making revenue or making money whenever you start creating your business model. It's not just about investment, because of course investors will want to know what you've been doing and how people react to what you've done. It's also for another key thing that we don't really think about at the beginning, the team. You will have to convince people to come at a very early stage of the startup, and you might not be able to match the salary. So how do you do that? By your passion, by your stories, by building in public and building your own personal brand. By doing all of that, you will then be able to validate your product so that when you do go out there and you open the door, they will come.